Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by the great orchestrator, composer and conductor Don Davis. Since the late 1970s, Don Davis has been an important figure in the world of film scoring. He orchestrated the scores for films and TV series such as The Incredible Hulk, Heart to Heart, Die Hard 2, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Maverick, Clear and Present Danger, Casper, Toy Story, Ransom, and many more. On top of that, Don showed his massive skills as a film composer, scoring films such as Bound, House on Haunted Hill, Jurassic Park III, Matrix, Matrix Reloaded, and Matrix Revolutions, Behind Enemy Lines, The Marine, Beyond the Sky, and many more. During this year's Soundtrack Cologne, the 17th edition of the Congress, Don not only participated in a live panel, but was also selected to be presented with the Lifetime Achievement Award. It is my pleasure to welcome Don Davis.
Wow, I'm so flattered I might just explode.
Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. It is a pleasure to talk to you today, Don.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you on my show. And Don, at first, I would like to talk about the invitation to Soundtrack Cologne 2020 and the importance of the Congress and the interaction and the networking opportunity with fans and also fellow composers during the panel. What are your thoughts on that and on panels in general and the importance of the Congress, any Congress?
Well, unfortunately, as you may know, I wasn't able to attend the Congress. In
Yes.
fact, I was turned away at the airport due to the COVID crisis. And so I can't comment too much about how the interactions were because they're really outside of the one panel that I participated in. I really didn't have any contact. And I certainly didn't have a contact with any of the other composers, which was disappointed because I really actually did want to interact with them somewhat.
Yes, that's very unfortunate, and of course the COVID crisis put the kibosh on the live panel, so to speak. So I, of course, would have participated if it had been in Cologne. They had to make adjustments and, of course, switch to or orchestrate and conduct a virtual panel, which, of course, I also enjoyed. But let's see, maybe as I understand, they want to invite you next year to give you the award in person if the Congress will take place next year, actually, I hope.
Well, as everyone knows, nobody knows anything, and we'll see if this kind of travels is even possible next June.
I certainly hope so. And Don, the Lifetime Achievement Award, of course, is very prestigious. And how would you describe your journey in the business up until the present day? If you were to sum up your career, what are your thoughts?
I guess you can sort of divide my career into before Matrix and after Matrix. But from the beginning, I just wanted to do good work. The hard part really is getting work, and then doing work is kind of the reward. But it was the work that always motivated me. And as you well know, I think composers can choose their own hours as long as they choose all of them. And it's really a very lonely and difficult way to make a living. So but in terms of categorizing my career or describing it, I can only say I just took the work that was offered and did the best that I could with it.
Yes, and you certainly did a very good job. And before we talk about The Matrix and Lillian Lana Wachowski and your other collaborations, I would like to talk about your work as an orchestrator, as you had worked with very renowned composers such as James Horner, Alan Silvestri, David Newman, Randy Newman, just to name a few. You had worked on films such as Clear and Present Danger, Toy Story, I Love Trouble, Death Becomes Her, Maverick. Could you please explain the process of orchestration, as the input of an orchestrator, as I understand, can vary from project to project?
You're absolutely right. Every job was different. Every composer has a different way of working. Um, I have to say, I think uh, my my greatest pleasure was working with Randy Newman, uh, because not only is he a brilliant composer, but we became very good friends, and it's just a joy to work with him. Also, Randy, in particular, always worked with completed sketches. He wasn't one to he was never comfortable with farming out cues and having, just someone else completely write a cue and put his name on it. Um, some of the other composers I've worked with didn't did not have that ethic in mind, but Randy Newman, he's not only one of the most brilliant and generous composers in the business, but he has a very high personal ethic that influenced me a great deal, and I respect a great deal. He also has a very unique approach to writing music, and I always found it. I always learned something from his approach to string writing, for example, and uh, his music sounds simple, but it's really deceptively complicated. But other composers had other ways of writing. Many of them would give an orchestrator a complete sketch, but sometimes we didn't get a complete sketch, and were required to you know be ghost composers, working, of course, with the composer's materials and motives and themes. But sometimes we were basically on our own, uh, and so I've had quite a bit of experience doing that.
I bet you did, and I believe it was even James Horner who once conducted a class at university, and he described what you just said, that oftentimes a piano melody is given to an orchestrator, and then they flesh it out into a 4 or 5 minute piece of music.
Yeah, that can happen. I have to say with James Horner, although he would farm out cues now and again, uh, in his instance, he wasn't doing that because he didn't have the ability to write the music himself. He did it because of time constraints. And I have to say, most of the composers I've worked with at least fell into that category. There are composers, of course, who um, do not have the ability to write it themselves, and they rely entirely on other people to write their music for them. Fortunately, I've avoided working with composers of that category, and uh, I have to say, of the composers that you mentioned, Alan Silvestri, David Newman, Randy Newman in particular, and James Horner, uh, they were all very capable composers who certainly didn't need to have somebody write their music for them. In the case of James Horner, it was always a matter of time constraints.
Yes, thank you very much for elaborating on that, Don. And does the fact that you orchestrate yourself allow you to write more quickly and efficiently, as you know what might work and which parts may not be performed well by a live orchestra?
Well, I mean, this gets into a little bit of more complicated arena. I have orchestrated my own music. Uh, in particular, I did all the orchestration on the first Matrix movie. The two sequels, however, the time constraints were such that I did employ some other orchestrators to finish the work. Um, but also, we're getting into the subject of mocking up scores for the directors, which they require hearing all the music before they will allow it to be recorded for the picture. This is, of course, in films that use an orchestra for the score, and that becomes really problematic because there are things that work in the orchestra and there are things that work in the computer, but those aren't always the same thing. And the difficulty I would have is that if there was an idea that I had that would work very well for the orchestra, it wasn't always something that you could mock up with any precision. And the result is that I would write music that worked on the computer and once it went into the orchestra, it was less than ideal. So I hope I'm not straying too far from your question, but
No.
that's one thing that we've had to grapple with. Of course, sometimes the films are entirely done with synthesizers, so that is not an issue. It makes orchestral scoring that much more difficult.
Yes, I bet it does. And of course, you also need to conduct the music either by yourself or you choose someone to do it for you. And I know that even many of the top composers are not necessarily comfortable conducting their own music. What are your feelings on conducting? As I know you also conduct yourself, but how would you explain the difficulty of conducting your music or somebody else's?
Well, I don't find conducting my music difficult, frankly. Uh, the I would I haven't really been in this position, but as I understand it, some composers are asked to remain in the booth in the recording stage with the directors uh, to discuss the score as someone else is conducting it, which is not something I'm comfortable with, and I'm I'm not comfortable. When someone else is conducting my music, and they're rehearsing it, and there's something I want rehearsed, I'll tell the conductor to rehearse it. It makes much more sense for me to simply rehearse it myself, and it's less of a waste of time. So I'm usually rather particular about how I want my music performed, and I generally don't feel that someone else can conduct my music better than I can.
Yes, I get your point, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on that too, Don. And now I would like to talk about your collaboration with Lily and Lana Wachowski. You had done 4 movies with them, Bound and the Matrix series. And Bound was actually their directorial debut, a great neo-crime thriller featuring, of course, very good performances also by Joe Pantoliano. And how did you approach story and how did you meet the Wachowskis back then?
I met the Wachowskis through their editor, a man named Zach Steinberg, and he got me the script. When they were looking for a composer, he got the script to me, and I was very, very impressed with the writing in the script. And I was fortunate that they chose me to score it. My approach musically to that film was kind of a nod to Ennio Morricone and his his approach to gangster movies, and that seemed to work well for that particular production.
Did they offer you the job to score Matrix directly, or I mean, as a result of having scored Bound, or did you have to submit some material first, which they could then sell Warner Brothers? How did that work back then, 20 years ago?
It was rather interesting, and I think that they could pull it off mostly because there were two of them. I think if there's only one of them, they would not have been able to retain the power that they managed to retain. And so when, unbeknownst to me, while I was working on Bound, they had already approached Warner Brothers with The Matrix, and Warner's was interested in producing it. Wachowskis had never directed a film before, and so the Warner Brothers wasn't about to commit a $75 million film to someone who had never directed. So they went out and did Bound, directed Bound as a precursor to being hired on The Matrix. So after Bound, they Warner Brothers was satisfied that they were up to the job, and when they went to Warner Brothers, they insisted on using the same cinematographer, editor, and composer, as well as I think a few other principals that they used on Bound. And it wasn't so much that they were being loyal to us, but they felt, I'm certain that they knew that if they acquiesced any of those decisions to Warner Brothers, they would lose control of their project. So I was very fortunate to be the happy recipient of that situation. But it was a matter of it was their concept of keeping control of the project that they insisted that Warner Brothers use the people that they choose and not the people that Warner Brothers chose.
Has there been any specific scene and or cue of the Matrix series which fans and even fellow composers praised in particular?
That's a good question. I can't really say that there is. Um, People who appreciate the score appreciate it from a more technical point of view than, there isn't really very much in there that you can take home and whistle. And part of the reason for that is that many of the scenes in which you would have written that kind of music, they chose to use with needle drops and tracks. The Rage Against the Machine, for example, at the very end of the movie. So people who have complimented me on the music generally seem to appreciate the process over any specific moments.
The scores offer a great deal of complexity also, Don. I mean, the brass writing, the string writing, and also the choir. And many people also said that both the films and the music were actually ahead of their time. Do you think that even back then, more than 20 years ago, it was difficult to sell the score the way it was conceived? Or do you think that, the Wachowskis were always open to your ideas? What do you remember about the communication with them back then?
Well, it wasn't so much my communication with them, but they held control of the film very tightly, and so I dealt with them and only them. For example, and I don't think this has ever happened. Certainly, I mean, perhaps in the old days, the studio system, they used to hire directors to shoot the scenes, and when the film was shot, the directors were told to leave, and that's a relic of 60, 70 years ago. That does not happen now. Uh, but what is unusual, at least unusual in 2003, is that I had scored the entirety of Matrix Revolutions. I had written it and recorded it. It was in the can before Joel Silver ever saw the film. That's something that doesn't happen ever. So I was very lucky in that I didn't get an interference outside of the Wachowskis, but I only had to deal with their micromanagement, which made it quite a bit simpler than dealing with a committee full of people who wanted to tell me what to do all the time.
Reloaded and Revolutions, they were shot back to back. Did the Wachowskis invite you to start writing while they were shooting to offer you more leeway and more creative freedom and more time, or did you start writing when everything was shot?
I started writing when everything was shot. I mean, I suppose I could have started writing some things, but until it's shot, I don't know where the music is going to go. Let's give you an example. I had some ideas in Reloaded about scoring the scene with the Oracle. There was only one scene with the Oracle in Reloaded. It was quite a strong scene. And I had some ideas about doing that, but when it came down to spotting the scene, the Wachowskis didn't even want music in it. So I've found over the years that every time I try to write something for the film before it's shot, it's always fruitless.
Especially the second one and the third one, they had some really big standout moments. Of course, the first one also included chase scenes and so on, but in the second one, it was taken to another level, and the piece was called Mona Lisa Overdrive, the big highway chase sequence, for instance. What can you tell me about scoring scenes of this kind, which are fast-paced and also have a tremendous production value?
Well, as I mentioned in the first Matrix, they used needle drops for a number of scenes. In Reloaded, they wanted some of those same artists to write new music for that, and in some cases they wanted me to collaborate with those artists. Mona Lisa Overdrive was actually written by Ben Watkins with some orchestral flourishes that I provided. Mona Lisa Overdrive, as I suppose you know, is actually the title of a William Gibson book. I guess I'm misremembering about Mona Lisa Overdrive, but Ben Watkins, who is Juno Reactor, is Ben Watkins' band, and so Ben Watkins, he's kind of the John Lennon of Juno Reactor. So he wrote the bulk of that. That was called it was the freeway chase in Reloaded.
Yes.
And the freeway chase actually went on for a good 20 minutes or so. And the last, I think, 4 or 5 minutes was taken over with orchestral music, which I wrote. But that was essentially a collaboration between Ben and I. Navras was quite a different situation. They wanted an electronic end credit, and they wanted Ben to do a remix of a cue that I did, which they called the Super Burly Brawl, which is when Neo is doing the final fight with Smith. The big scene in the rain where thousands of other Smiths are looking on. And
Yeah.
So I wrote that scene, and then Ben remixed it for the end credit, and that was Navras. And so Navras was something of a collaboration between Ben and I, but essentially he took music that I had written and then remixed it and added, his own flourishes and that sort of thing. So Navras is quite different, and it as an end credit piece, it did not. It didn't function as film music in which it caught action or anything like that. It just played, and I thought it worked wonderfully.
It did, absolutely. And that was a standout moment in part three. And especially the end credit piece was also fantastic. And the fight between Keanu Reeves and Smith. I think the first Matrix was a masterpiece, also film wise, and of course, score wise. And the second one featured more action, yet it wasn't too over the top. The third one, especially when it comes to the fight between the machines and the people, that was really, really, really massive. And I can imagine it must have been quite the experience actually scoring these huge, humongous battle sequences.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we did the Matrix, their instructions was, okay, this is a big fight, it's huge, make it as big as you can, and all that kind of stuff. And then when Reloaded came along, it says, okay, has to be bigger and more climactic and huge and all this stuff. And then when Revolutions came along, it's okay, it has to be bigger. We have to build on that and make it huge. And there's a there's a limit to just the amount of sound you can get on tape. So that was quite a challenge, actually. That it seemed I was constantly chasing for bigger and more massive and more climactic and climactic again. And I think if you'll notice Wachowski's work, all their set pieces are extraordinarily long and have various levels of climactic moments, which is particularly challenging.
Don, I assume the scores back then were recorded with a full orchestra as opposed to recording the music in separate sessions in the brass, the strings, and so on.
Yeah, the process you're describing we call striping, and they actually asked me to stripe or do extra takes of the Neo Smith fight so that Ben could separate the elements when he was doing his remix. But in general, I really don't like to work that way because it's not music making, and so I generally resist the efforts to do that kind of thing, which I suppose answers the question why I don't work very much anymore.
Yes, it kind of does, and I was going to ask you about this also because after you had done these big scores, which remain so popular to this day, one would assume that filmmakers everywhere are basically beating down your door. So I think many fans were kind of and still are kind of disappointed that you didn't score more films in that vein, or that you didn't score more studio hits and so on and so forth. But I guess your previous answer explains it.
I think if you take a look at my door, you will find few signs of any beating on it. Uh, so whatever. I think a bigger factor in all of that is that the economy crashed in 2008, and things changed a lot then. There's a lot of calamity going on. I think that was 2008 was quite a turning point. I think in the making of films and in the investing in films, and it's the landscape was very different after that.
I would also like to talk just a little bit about the Matrix live concerts. And you had also done a few of those in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. How would you describe taking a movie and then preparing a live performance of it? Making sure everything is in sync. what can you tell me about the effort and everything that goes into this live experience, which you can share with the audience?
Well, happily for me, the the preparation of the Matrix score for performance live was done by Film Philharmonie in Berlin, and I wasn't. I did go over what they had done, but I wasn't super involved with it, so I didn't have to do all that kind of work. But these touring the Matrix live, conducting is really, you know, kind of a total joy. I mean, it's such a complete ego trip, and also it's all about the music. There's no one sitting in the back room saying, "Oh, well, could the music be bigger or smaller here, or faster or less busy, or something like that?" It's everything we do when we rehearse it is about getting the music right, and that's really such a joy. I can't even describe it.
And I'm hoping there will be more live performances of these scores should the pandemic end soon. Let's see what happens, and let's hope for the best, that also many more people that are not familiar with the Matrix will get to experience this, as the movies are still very popular and the scores have also been re-released due to the massive demand. And I love it how you created the music for these movies and for the Matrix sequences versus the real world, and so on. Don, I know there has been or have been talks about the Matrix Part 4. Are you at liberty to disclose whether or not you have been approached to work on this picture?
Well, I think I'm at liberty. I have not been approached.
I am also very shocked and surprised that nobody has reached out to you about that. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Well, I haven't heard anything, so maybe you've heard something.
Not at all. Not at all. I have absolutely no clue about the composer who they might choose. That's why I threw in that question, because I absolutely have no idea. Let's see what happens, and hopefully they will approach you about the project, because I feel you still have so much to offer for the business. I really hope they will reach out. Don, I would also like to talk about your opera a little bit, if you want to share some feelings on that. It's called Rio De Sangre. If I'm not mistaken, it was released in 2010. When did you actually start conceiving the idea of writing the opera, and what is it based on?
Well, I'd been thinking about it for about at least 10 years before I started it, and I believe it was around 2000 or 2001 that I uh, approached Kate Gale to write the libretto for an idea I had about a Latin American dictator, and it's something that evolved over quite a bit of time.
I know it has been performed. Do you plan on, let's say, also taking it to Germany and other European countries?
Well, actually, it has only been performed once in
Oh,
Milwaukee, Florentine Opera Company, and I would be delighted to have it done in Germany. I did pitch it to a few opera companies, in particular the um, let's see the opera company in Berlin. Uh, I guess the Comic Opera, although that opera company, in spite of its name, does not specialize just in comic opera. In fact, I think they did a production of Wozzeck that I saw a few years back. Um, but I did pitch it with them. But I think it would be a dream come true if someone in Germany were to produce it, because German opera is the best in the world, and gets the most support, and is the most forward-looking and adventurous programming is in German, in German opera. So yes, I would really love to have it done in Germany.
Don, what are you currently working on, if I may ask? Do you wish to continue writing some chamber music or piano solos or concert work? What do you have in mind, or what are you working on at the moment?
To answer your question, what I'm doing now is I get commissions from now and then for chamber music mostly, and some films. I scored a film that uh, my daughter shot, uh, a short film called uh, "Shut Up and Run," and that's been keeping me busy.
Do you have any tips and pointers for up and coming composers out there?
I'm sorry to say that I don't. I mean, things were so different when I got into the business, and uh, I they're so different that I don't really know what to tell young composers. Um, when I started working in the late '70s, uh, every night in American television there are three networks, and every night had three shows on the air, at least three shows on the air, and they all had orchestral scores. And so every week, that's 21 shows would record on average. Um, and so there was work out there, work for orchestrators, work for composers, that they would, and these composers, especially for action adventure shows, only having a week to score the music, needed people to help them out. Uh, and so, I got a lot of experience working with real orchestras and in a live orchestral situation. Uh, these opportunities just aren't there now, and I don't I don't know what to tell young composers. They seem to have kind of a network of trying to become interns for other composers, work as composers' assistants, while they still try to convince producers and directors to hire them for their projects. But uh, almost all of it is done with synthesizers. Um, I don't know what to tell them.
The business, changes quickly and time flies. And I mean, even since you scored, let's say, The Marine starring John Cena, it was in 2006, I believe, 14 years ago. And even since then, things have changed drastically.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have a vague recollection of that. Did you
Ex-
see it?
I did see it, but it was a long time ago and I haven't seen it since. And I don't have any big recollection of it, so I couldn't even tell you whether I thought it was particularly good or mediocre or particularly bad.
Well, John Cena was very muscular.
Yeah, he still is, yeah.
That's about all I remember too.
Don, I need to bring it up, and I'm sure, or I hope you had a better experience on that picture. Jurassic Park III, you entered the world of the dinosaurs. You used John Williams' themes and you wrote some exciting material of your own. And what can you tell me about Jurassic Park 3 and the legacy of the whole franchise and your involvement back then?
Well, actually, that movie was great fun. It doesn't have a good reputation, but I think for what it was really quite a good movie. It had uh, more of a kind of a witty comic approach to the dinosaurs than the other two movies that preceded it. And I thought it was really kind of a nice romp, but I had great fun scoring it. It was a joy to work with John Williams themes, but there was enough opportunity for me to work on material that was not related to John Williams, but was an attempt to match the integrity that John Williams brings to every score that he writes, and so that was really a great experience.
And I just realized there's one question I forgot to ask. If we still have some time, I would like to throw it in.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, because I haven't seen a Matrix live performance, how do you deal with, let's say, the licensed music? For instance, in Matrix 1, there's the Rob Dugan part, the piece which is called Club to Death, when Neo and Morpheus are walking down the street. Do you replace it with music of your own, or how did you deal with that?
We play those back on the same track that has dialogue and sound effects. So those are played back. There was one scene at the end of the Matrix where they used a Rage Against the Machine song. I think it was called "Wake Up." And when I was scoring that, they hadn't gotten the rights yet and asked me to cover it with orchestral music in case they weren't able to use the song, which I did and recorded. As it turned out, they did get the rights to the song, so that's what appeared in the picture. But when we do it live, it seemed, since it came at the end of the picture and it was an orchestral concert, it made a lot more sense to use the music that I had originally written for that moment. And that also gives the viewers a kind of a unique look at the film that they wouldn't have if they were just seeing it in the theater.
Thank you very much for elaborating on that. Don, thank you very much for taking so much time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that. I had a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I did very much. Thank you.